G'day there guys, it's Ben and Ali here from Pumped On Property. I'm feeling a little bit shorter than normal today. Ali and I have been playing around, we're sitting on some chairs out the back here. We're really excited about today's video where we're going to focus on the questions to ask an agent during an inspection. So when we sort of thought about this concept, I'm going to pop up a little bit. A little bit more. Damn it, I'm taller than my wife, but it's just awkward right now.
Cheating.
So we're going to talk a little bit about what type of agent you're actually working with. We're going to talk about some of the key questions to ask an agent and how you can get really useful information during that inspection. Not just walk around the property and have a look at it, but ask really meaningful questions to make sure that you get everything that you need, that you build a great relationship with the agent, and obviously ultimately get in a position where you've got some information that they may be overshared so that you're in a position to decide what you want to do from there. So I'll throw it over to you, Ali. Now, Ali's experience quickly is she's bought a heap of property for herself, and she's also bought over $150 million worth of property for our clients. So these are Ali's questions. These are the 101 things that she does every time she goes and catches up with an agent.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks for the intro. Yeah, so obviously a big part of what I do here at Pumped is inspecting properties. Definitely it's one of my favorite parts of the job, and there's so many different little things that you can do to get a lot more out of that inspection. Like Ben said, not just about seeing the property itself. So one of the key things that I'm doing when I get to the inspection is, I guess, trying to get to know the agent a little bit and working out what kind of agent I'm working with. So to put it pretty bluntly, there's two different categories. You're going to have one agent that knows everything about this house, and you're going to have another agent that just doesn't know anything.
Before you go into that, can I ask you a question? If an agent doesn't know anything, does that mean he's not a good agent? Or sometimes they're just lazy and they haven't bothered to get to that level with it yet?
Both.
Both,
definitely.
Okay.
Definitely a bit of both. So sometimes you can use an agent that perhaps is a little bit less experienced, and you can use that to your advantage, but then sometimes you do just get agents that are a little bit lazy and just haven't taken the time to get to know their vendor really well and get to know the ins and outs of the property. It's just another property for them. So yeah, good question. But yeah, look, I guess moving into, first question is when did the current owners buy the property and how much did they pay? So this is a really important one because it I guess it's going to affect the way the sellers are trying to sell. If say they bought it 12 months ago and then they've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on it, their expectation is going to be much higher and very different. So maybe if they bought it 20 years ago, you know that they've lived there for a long time, they've probably looked after it very well, and it's been very owner occupied. So that's a key question to find out a bit more about the story about the house.
We love to buy properties if we can, and it's not all the time that you can do this, that have been owner occupied for a long time, meaning they bought it a lot cheaper than what the market value is worth now, and they're the people that's, you know, don't worry about splitting hairs sometimes over that $20,000–$30,000 reduction, as opposed to people that paid a premium for it 12 months ago, have overcapitalized on it and are emotionally invested because nobody wants to lose money in property if they don't have to, and
Absolutely.
Therefore you pay a premium for that just because they don't have any leverage or any power to negotiate because they're sort of stuck. When you factor in entry costs, exit costs, holding costs, reno costs, they're really, you know, costing themselves some cash.
By asking that one question, you can really determine how the rest of the negotiation process is going to go, and you can also determine whether it's actually worth your time pursuing it. Because if they have unrealistic expectations from the beginning, sometimes it's better to just sit on it for a month or two and see how that changes.
The market will set everybody's expectations. Now in a super hot market, you know, everybody's buying everything for way too much and stuff just flies out the door. But in a market with conditions like we're in now Australia-wide, I think sometimes finding a great property that is overvalued and just letting the market set their expectations. Like, nobody's going to walk through the door today and pay 50 grand more than they need to in any major state in Australia. So you've got time, the market will soften their expectations, and then you might just pick up that property you want at the right price, or you might miss it, and there's always another fish in the sea.
Exactly, yeah. And again, coming back to the type of agent that you're dealing with, whether they know everything about the property or know nothing, if they know that information, you know that you're going to be able to gain a lot more information throughout the rest of inspection. If they don't, and more often than not they won't know the specific details, get them to go have a chat to their vendor and then get that information out to you via email afterwards, so that you're in a position where you know where everything's at. Next kind of question is more specific to do with the property. So again, talking from the vendors and the current owners, what they have done to the property. So bringing back to what you said, Ben, if they've gone and spent a whole lot of money on it, they're much more emotionally invested. If they haven't done anything to it, then probably likely you know that if you're to pick this property up, there's going to be some kind of maintenance and some kind of work to do, and that can always come back to your building and pest, but another good thing to find out about the property.
For sure, I think that's so important, not just because you want to know how much you can buy it for, but you also want to know what you're in for after you do buy it. Like, the last thing you want is to buy this property that looks cheap, that has all these issues attached with it, and then you're up for market value after you put your time, energy and money into actually fixing it up.
So previous work is important, but you can actually take that one step further and see if the agent knows about the further history of the property. If they've been an agent in that area for 20 years, they may have sold that property 2 or 3 times before. I've seen it with a few top performers in the area. So definitely they might have even more history or more knowledge, or even if they just speak to their vendors, they'll have had those questions asked when they purchased. So definitely good to be aware of that. Another good question, are there any unapproved structures?
I swear to God you were just about to punch me in the arm. Like, another good question, let's do it. What's this one, Ellie?
Don't tempt me, Ben.
I've got another one for you guys. It's coming off the press hot.
Unapproved structures. It is an important one, to be honest. So there are, and that it kind of comes in from that last question as well, because if the owners may have added a beautiful brand new deck, they might have spent $20,000 on this amazing deck. If it's not council approved, it sort of does lose its value a bit. So being aware of any unapproved structures, they could be a carport, a shed, a deck, there are various things. And you can do these searches once you've purchased a property through your solicitors and look into it then, but always a good idea to have as much information as you possibly can up front. So not necessarily a deal breaker in all situations, but if you've got the information, then you're able to make a better decision.
I think that's such a good point, because you also get unapproved granny flats, bedrooms, car ports, car accommodation, and they might be marketing the property as a 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom, 2-car garage home, but in reality, like
number of times, unfortunately, very illegal. But
or a granny flat in the backyard, and you're like, yes, this looks like such a good opportunity, and then you start doing some due diligence, and you're like, it's actually a 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom, 1-car garage home. And why that is so exciting is, firstly, that's what the market value of the property really should be, so that you can educate them that way. Or secondly, if you really do have your heart set on the property, sometimes you can ask them as a due diligence clause to go and get those structures approved, or try and do that during the settlement period, and then that gives you peace of mind that either yes, they were built to legal standard, or no, they weren't, and that gives you a negotiating tool to negotiate one way or the other. At the end of the day, knowledge is power. So again, going into that inspection, your #1 job is to get as much information as possible. So yeah, gives you the heads up. So another question, and this is probably one of the most important questions, and the very first question that I ask at every inspection I go to is, there's a different ways that you can ask it, but what's the situation and the story behind the seller's experience? So they may be owner-occupiers, they may be investors, the property may be vacant. So if you're aware of their situation, that then helps you put together the best negotiation strategy moving forward. So for example, if the property's sitting there vacant, nobody wants their property sitting there vacant, I don't care how much you're worth, losing money every week feels bad. Exactly. So exactly right. If it's sitting there vacant for a long period of time, they're going to want the shortest settlement period they can possibly get. So that you can use that in your negotiations. If they are owner occupiers, they actually might want a little bit of time to find their next property.
up here in Queensland, for example, your standard settlement is 30 days. That's not the case in the rest of Australia. So it is quite a narrow opportunity for people who haven't already found a house to live in to then find a house negotiated and then work out what their terms are going to be.
And I think, you know, sometimes in terms of like why we're collecting all of this information is for leverage and to negotiate the right outcome for the person selling, for the agent, and for you. Like, a real estate sale doesn't work unless it's a win-win for everyone. You know, there are times in the cycle where there's no buyers, so you have an advantage, but most of the time when we're in a balanced environment like we are now, it's all of these little things help. And so, you know, if you're coming in with a lower offer than somebody else, but your terms might be more flexible because you understand that they're a family and you don't need the property to settle for 4 months while they find something else, you might be able to, you know, nab it. Or if they've bought something else on the flip side and they need a really quick settlement so that they can get their money and move on with that one, then you can be flexible as a negotiator there as well.
Exactly, yeah. Sometimes we use rent back situations, extended settlements. There's a whole lot of things that you can use. Having known that information up front just makes your offer stand out a lot more.
I forget how many things I expect you guys to do. When we actually start recording these videos, I'm like, shit, you guys do so much stuff, hey?
I agree.
I never ever give anybody in the office any sort of positive compliments, so that's as close as Ali's going to get.
So moving on, I guess, yeah, knowing their situation is really important. It could be vacant, it could be owner occupied. The other opportunity is that it could actually be tenanted. You want to then know, how long have the tenants been there? Do they want to stay on? That's a really important one. Are they currently on a lease? All of these things will affect your situation and again your negotiations.
100%. I'm not sure if you already said this one or not, but did we talk about how long it's been on the market above?
It is there, but no, go for your life. I was going to bring that up next.
I think it's a really good question because there's this rule in real estate, and it is definitely a rule in real estate sales. Prior coming into this business, you worked in like one of the top agencies on the northern beaches of Sydney from a sales perspective, and you know, if you don't sell your property in the first 30 days, there's research to suggest that the likelihood of you getting the terms and the price that you want dramatically go down over time. I think they wrote about it actually in Freakonomics, that book a few years back, where they talked about, you know, just a real estate person is getting incentivized on a commission on a total deal size, but they don't really mind if they sell it for 970k or $1 million, because in their mind it doesn't change what they make most. So, you know, if you as a seller like me want to get the absolute maximum dollar when you sell so that you can reinvest into something else or go into cash, then you want to make sure that your agent is giving you, you know, the best strategy, the best marketing plan, and the best advice to move that product as quickly as possible. Otherwise you risk that. And this question is so powerful because, you know, we obviously follow properties on and off market all the time that, you know, when we're buying them, are generally only been on for a week, but there's a whole series of properties that we watch, we put like an asterisk on it and come back to months later because we know they're not going to sell because they're overpriced or the owner wouldn't let someone in. And that can be a really powerful thing on the flip side, knowing that they're getting more and more and more desperate the longer they hold it, and the offers are getting lower and worse over time too. So take that stuff to your advantage as well. It's a very important question to ask.
Absolutely, yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Very. What?
But definitely, having been on the sales side and then being on the buyer side and having negotiated on both, really, it is very interesting because in those first 2 weeks, that's when you're really covering your active buyers. You know, these are people that know the market, that have already had offers on. They're the most likely people that are going to be purchasing your property. So using that on the flip side as a buyer, if it has been on the market for a long period of time, you know that you do have a competitive advantage for whatever that reason is. More often than not, the sellers will go into it with very high, unrealistic expectations.
Always.
They will then receive offers in those first week or first two from their active buyers, their best market. They decide they're not happy with it and move on. I see it a number of times, about 2, 3, 4, 6 weeks later sometimes, they end up accepting a lower offer. It is one of the most common mistakes that I see vendors do in markets.
And the way you can use it to your advantage is if a great property comes on in the first day because you're active in the market in the suburb you want to buy, and you know that it represents great value or below market, take advantage of that, protect yourself with your conditions as you do more due diligence. On the flip side, you can, if you really like a property but you want to be patient on it, then you can just play the waiting game. And I'll give you 2 personal examples of this where I completely overpaid recently for a property for myself, and then completely underpaid as well. So my wife recently decided that the house that we're living in wasn't what she wanted to be in. And like, without telling me, found another property that she decided she did want to move into, and went and checked it out a couple of times before I even knew about it. In those couple of times she checked it out, she told the agent everything that we've explained not to do in today's video, and gave away our whole position and told him that we wanted on it, and came home and started to put pressure on me. So the agent already knew how emotionally involved my wife was. We paid an extra 100k than we were supposed to for that property. The cool thing about overpaying is the market thinks that everything's worth that value, and then everyone after us started overpaying the suburb too, which has brought up our, I still believe it's a market value property, but you know, I'm happy to live there for the next 20 or 30 years.
I was gonna say, do you love your house?
I love the house. I just cannot, like, I'd rather have my teeth pulled out without painkillers than overpay for something, just because it's my nature, it's my skill set, it's what I do.
Same.
You know, the flip side of that was, I think it was Ali or Crystal identified this big block of land recently down on the beaches in Brisbane for me. It was completely overpriced. I think they had it on at 750k. I knew that the person selling it couldn't finance the construction because it was a subdivision block, and she had basically run out of money. She needed to sell it. She had it at a very high price point. We waited 6 months. I just kept an eye on it, talked to the agent once every 3 weeks, sent him a little bait text saying, you know, my offer's on the table. A couple of days before Christmas, I get a call from the guy saying she's prepared to drop the price by 100k. And he rang me before talking to anyone else, and I picked it up that day, which represented great value, and I've just sold one of the blocks, I'll build on the other. So patience is a huge thing. You know, don't get too emotional if it's your own property, because I truly believe I could have paid 100 grand less for my home if my wife hadn't completely fucked it up for us. But we love the property, it's our home, and over 30 years that 100k, you know, as much as it kills me, isn't gonna matter.
Exactly. To be honest, I kind of did the same thing, but I don't regret it at all. It wasn't quite 100,000, maybe only 10, but it was the only property in that area that fitted what I wanted, and as an owner-occupier, that was important to me. So I don't regret my decision in that situation.
Hey,
as an investment,
driving up Australian property prices for everyone else.
My investment hat on, completely different subject. So yeah, no, that's cool. But look, another question that I really wanted to bring up, and this is again a really important one. It's actually 2 questions. I'm going to break it down into 2. So one is, what interest has there been in the property? And then the next question is, have there been any written offers? So I just want to go and explain the difference between those 2. So when you're asking an agent what interest there's been, or even if you do start off and go, yeah, what have you sort of had any offers? They will then come back and usually go, oh, well, we've had 20 groups through the open home, we've had 30 groups through the open home. So they then kind of revert back. So if you break that question in half, you're already getting the specific information that you want from the agent. So in terms of what interest, when they do sit there and say to you, yeah, we had 20 groups through, we had 25 groups through, we had 3 groups through, it doesn't really mean a lot.
It means nothing. Like, written offers is all that means anything in this game, and an agent 101, I swear to God, the first day you work in a sales agency, they say create demand. The way that you create demand is tell everyone that there's heaps of interest on the property, it's a hot commodity, and it's going to be gone if you don't place an offer today. So just remember that that's where they're coming from, because that's their job, to create urgency. But the reason Ali asked that second question is absolute gold, because they can't hide behind that and they legally have to answer it.
Exactly, yeah. So when you're asking again what interest, and the vendors, they're sitting there terrified because they're selling, they're in the exact same situation as you. It's really scary. And if you've been on that side of the situation, particularly recently, you'll have an understanding of how the agent kind of gives that information to you. So example, I recently sold a property that I had, and I was getting what they call in vendor reports. So effectively it's a report on every single inspection. And at the end of the day, as the seller, I'm sitting there and I'm like, okay, great, you know, there's been 10 groups through, but no one has put money with the words that they're actually saying in this report. So it's very, very, very different, and you need to be able to decipher the difference between those two. So then having any written offers, that's when you know you're in competition and what kind of competition you're in. You know, there are certain situations where I've negotiated properties and I've been in multiple offer situations where there have been 8 other offers, and sometimes you can win and use all of the things that we've said here today to your advantage and still win in those situations. But definitely the big difference between what interest there's been in the property and have there been any written offers, and knowing again what competitive situation you're in. Information is power. Information is power, and the higher the quality of your questions, and we know that it's not comfortable for everyone to ask this. Like, anybody that comes into our business, like, the first 3 to 6 months is just getting comfortable with all of this stuff. Like, there's so many questions you ask, there's so much information that if you really want to buy great property at the right time that gets above average long-term capital gains and great cash flow, then you know, there's a science to this stuff. It's not just rocking up and going, I inspected 10 properties this day, this is the lucky winner that you pull out of a hat. Like, it's really about getting so specific so that you absolutely knock the purchase out of the park, and instead of having to muck around like Ali and I did, buying, you know, a lot of properties ourselves and winning and losing on some of them, and, you know, probably misinvesting in some and getting great results on others. Could have just done a couple really, really well using this sort of stuff, and, you know, had a much simpler 10-year journey. Like, seriously. Hey, it was fun. I don't regret it. So fun as well. I just think the next 10 years we both decided, let's make it a path of less resistance as opposed to like grinding and pushing the rock all the way up the hill. Definitely, yeah. The next 10 years is going to be a lot of fun, but the last was fun too. We learned a lot. We have learned a lot. We learned a lot. One more quick question that I think is a good one to ask. Really dependent on your market and your situation as well, but with properties, with the form of auction sale becoming more and more popular, this one does become more and more relevant. And particularly up here in Queensland, there's not a lot of auctions in comparison to Sydney and Melbourne. So using the question, would the owners take pre-auction offers, is a really good one as well. And again, it's all about knowing what terms and conditions they want and using that to your advantage. But if you've got that knowledge, you can then, you know, if you're waiting there till auction day, sometimes you might miss out. So you've really got to be as prepared as possible, and if you've got the answer to that one, you can jump in quick and sometimes save yourself. A lot of people that are talked into going to auction in Queensland, whether we're talking Sunshine Coast, Brisbane, Gold Coast, where the auction clearance rates are consistently below 40%, which is horrible. Like, I would not roll the dice personally to go to auction in Queensland at this time of the cycle. And a lot of people still get talked into it by the agents, because the agents just like making, you know, this big sell around auctions or something. I don't know why. Like, I suppose it can be effective in certain suburbs at certain times, but I think it's market dependent, to be honest. It's fully market driven. Like, there's a lot of activity in the market. An auction sale is quite beneficial, and it actually can be beneficial to the buyer and the seller. And, you know, maybe that's another topic that we should touch on at some point. For sure, but I suppose in terms of this pre-auction offers, if it's not a hot market, you know, what the buyer wants to do is buy, what the seller wants to do is sell, what the agent wants to do is sell. And so sometimes, you know, a lot of properties, maybe 40% of the properties that are going to auction that we think are viable for our clients, we actually will buy pre-auction. And sometimes people think they've got to wait for the day and either miss out on it or buy it after auction, and that's just absolutely not the case. So that question starts a conversation about that. Ultimately, we all know everyone wants the same thing, but if it's a really hot market, they probably will move it at auction. Most of the time they won't, and you'll have an advantage there. Exactly, and I think, you know, like you said, when the auction clearance rate is below 40%, you've got to be looking at either picking it up pre-auction because you're applying that kind of pressure, or even waiting till auction, let it pass in, like 60% of them do, and purchase after. They're usually a lot more negotiable then as well. So use those two things up your sleeve when you're buying at auction in the right market. I can see the last thing on our board is like Ali's advice. Let's hook into that, and that will sort of round out this video. So again, I guess coming back to the inspections, the key job that you have going into an inspection is to find out as much information as you can. So my best advice when you're asking these questions is ask them and then listen. the worst thing that you can do is interrupt them, take them on another tangent. If you sit there quietly, they will continue to talk. And the more they talk, the more information you have. So that is my key bit of advice. Ask the question and then listen.
It's super hard not to feel the silence as humans, but agents love to talk. They're obviously in the sales game. Most people in sales love talking about themselves in particular. We've got a little strategy, I suppose, where you go into the property, you have a bit of a chit chat with the agent, you go through, you do the inspection, and then Ali and Crystal and Ads use that characteristic at the end, or that like little piece of advice around just asking a couple of questions and being quiet, and by that point the agent feels more comfortable, and so often they will give away information that they should not be legally giving away or ethically giving away for their client, and they are the little snippets of gold that you ask all of these other questions for, so that they let their guard down, they know you're the real deal, and they start giving you what you actually really want, which is, you know, stuff around price most of the time for me personally, because I'm such a price buyer, or you know, little things that they shouldn't be telling around the motivation of the seller or themselves.
Yeah, exactly.
So we hope you've got some value from today's video. I've actually really liked that one.
Yeah, it was fun.
They're the key questions to ask a real estate agent during an inspection. For those of you that don't know us, we run Pumped on Property. If you haven't already, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. We've just launched our first podcast, which is the Pumped on Property Show, which we're super excited about. It's available on Apple and Android stuff. So, you know, get out there, keep learning, keep doing your thing, and thank you for your time and attention today.
Thanks guys, see ya.